So, welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Jonathan Rosenberg, who is the Chief Technology Officer and Head of AI at Five9. Now, Jonathan has dedicated his career to transforming the telecommunications industry and joins Five9 from Cisco, where he was CTO for the Collaboration Technology Group, otherwise known as CTG. And Jonathan is well known for his authorship of the SIP protocol, which is the foundation for modern IP-based telecommunications. Prior to Cisco, Jonathan was the chief technology strategist at Skype, remember that one, where he guided the company's technology strategy. He received his bachelor's and master's degree from MIT and holds a PhD in electrical engineering from Columbia University. Welcome to the, I was like, take a breath there. Welcome to the podcast, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Excellent, Adrian. Thank you. Glad to be here and doing very well.
Excellent. Now, that was a pretty, preeminent sort of introduction. Is there anything I missed out that you wanted to add?
No, the only thing I guess I would add is also been working on AI. And I will say this. There's a lot of people who just started working on AI sort of like 3 years ago when ChatGPT showed up. That's of course when it got really exciting. But at Skype, I ran the research team that actually had a small AI group who were doing like early day stuff on churn prediction and some audio quality improvements. And similarly at Cisco, yeah, I drove the AI program there that led to things like noise removal and face identification. And of course, here at Five9, also been working AI. So I'd add I'm a 10 plus year veteran of AI technologies applied to telecommunications as well, because that's what we're going to be talking about here today. So
Yeah.
wanted to add that to the mix.
Well, let's get straight into it, shall we? I mean, so as in the setup to this podcast, I know that you said to me that you think that CX, or customer experience, is reaching a tipping point.
Yep.
And I wanted to understand, what does that mean? What do you mean by that?
The tipping point I think that's happening here is that consumer expectations have seen like a sharp change
Mm-hmm.
the last few months. And those expectations are translating into their expectations about how they're going to get customer service from businesses they engage with.
Mm-hmm.
And if those businesses are not providing a customer experience that's sort of aligned with their expectations, it's going to really be painful. Like we'll see increased churn rates. We'll see customers have always been fickle, right? They easily, change around between brands. That's going to get a lot worse. And it's approaching a tipping point because of this exponential change in the improvement in experience. And what I specifically am talking about is like everyone's using AI.
Mm-hmm.
They're using it in their personal lives. They're getting a lot of benefit of it. People are now used to lengthy, complicated chit chat conversations with these things that do amazing results for them. So imagine, Adrian, as a user, you logged in the morning on ChatGPT and you have it plan your day and make your recipes and do a bunch of work for you and do some research for you. And then, you got to update cancel your healthcare appointment. You log into your healthcare provider and you log into its bot, and it looks like ancient history by comparison.
Right.
So it's exposing this embarrassment around it, and so we can talk more about like what the exactly users are expecting out of these things. But that's the tipping point: is that these past generations just not meeting customer expectations, and we're entering this new agentic CX era where you're going to get this incredible customer experience, and customers are expecting it, demanding
Right.
it.
And can you paint us a picture? I mean, and so we know that sort of, I think those things are being driven by the possibilities of this new technology, particularly kind of AI, generative AI and agentic AI, and also changing consumer expectations and adoption of this kind of technology, but particularly from from a consumer perspective, but then that's driving into expectations around what kind of enterprises and brands need to
Yeah,
deliver.
that's
So
right.
how do you think what we were likely to see as a change? How is experience going to change as a result? And then what's going to be the impact on customers, agents, and businesses? I mean, kind of
Yeah.
paint us a picture.
Yeah. Well, what we'll see is what we're already seeing, which is a rush from enterprises to get on this bandwagon and adopt this AI agent technology to up-level their customer experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we can think about that from the perspective of the consumer and from the perspective of the brand that the consumer is engaging with, right? And from the perspective of the consumer, it's going to have a lot of properties that we sort of come to expect from these consumer chatbots. So it's going to be personalized, right?
Mhm.
It's going to remember you, it's going to know you, it's going to remember your past conversations and your past purchases. You're going to come to expect that.
Mhm.
It's going to be highly conversational, right? No longer this sort of rigid flows. You can chat back and forth, ask different questions. It's really flexible, a lot in the same way that you talk to a human agent. In fact, what that's another part of the expectation is like consumer expectations will be it's a lot more like talking to a real person, except, and this is another thing,
Mm.
I think is fascinating. It will in many ways be better because it's almost like a super agent,
Right.
right? Because the human still operates at human speed, right? They can't read a pile of data, analyze a bunch of things. If they want to perform a transaction in a backend system, they have to go log into a user interface, click around, put you on hold, do some stuff. That's going to go away. Like these new AI agents are going to be able to like collect your data, analyze it, make recommendations, do things for you. You'll get these superhuman experiences.
Mhm.
And we're already seeing them,
Mhm.
right? We're already seeing them in our consumer experiences, and what those will translate into the consumer direction for the brand. So that's the consumer side.
Mhm.
Okay. And then I'll just touch on the enterprise side. We could talk more about that too. What the enterprises are going to see is they're going to see the two things that they've always wanted. They're going to see reduced costs and increased customer satisfaction. Like at
Right.
the end of the day, all things distill to that. And they'll see that from reduced need for human agents, they will not go away. And it will never go away. And it's a terrible idea to think that they're going to go away. But there'll be less need for them, and they'll be handling much different types of engagements that are higher value, more emotional, empathetic, but they'll get a lot of reduction in cost. And of course, customer experience will be great. And the ultimate pinnacle of this, my prediction is the best of breed in businesses will perfectly blend the human and the AI agent experiences together facing the consumer.
Right.
That's going to be where the best success is.
So I want to kind of just pick up on something, yeah, something you mentioned where you talked about most of these experiences will be conversational, and I wanted to get your take on this because so I look at this sort of stuff and I just think about it from particularly from a customer's experience, and also from the things that have gone before in terms of technology and things. And we're entering into an agentic era, but before the last kind of few years has been around the use of how do we harness the potential of generative AI. And prior to
Yeah.
that, if you think about particularly chatbots, it was very much rules driven type of interfaces. However, those rules driven interfaces were quite good at doing sort of predictive sort of stuff. Looking at sort of demand and going, actually, are you calling us about X, Y, and Z? Or our data tells us
Yeah.
most people are talking about X, Y, and Z. Now, if you think about like a customer's experience, actually typing something, or it's either, people are getting better at introducing voice interfaces to this, so which is then doing, real time translation, but it's quicker to read something and then choose something than it is to speak something or actually type something. And so
Yes.
are you also kind of seeing a maturation in the sort of the design of these
Yeah.
interfaces? And because sometimes I'm frightened that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
If you know
Exactly.
what I mean.
Absolutely. So I think the future is what we've been calling multimodal. And again,
Hmm.
I think this isn't here yet, right? So this is looking forward to, I think, where it's going to go. Um, is what'll happen is we used to think about it from the perspective of channel choice. Like as a consumer, I could call or I could chat. And
Mm.
you could pick, yes, and it was one or the other.
Mm.
And what we're now going to see with these new AI agents is that you, on a turn by turn basis, can speak something, type something, or send something.
Mm.
And similarly, in the opposite direction, the AI in return can speak something, send you a textual message, or send you visual content.
Mm.
And I think and so that first of all will allow us to use the right modality. And so the example I like to give is you could be speaking with an agent, and let's assume you're doing it like in a little web widget in the web page, right? You're speaking to it through your computer and it says, "Oh, what's your account ID?" Instead of now doing the annoying thing, which no one likes, of like speaking it out, you could go just copy paste it and text it, and or you could speak it.
Yeah.
um, and so that's something that doesn't have to be pre-programmed either. Like the user can be flexible about how they present data. And then in return, certain information, Adrian, you said this very important, is better represented visually. And my favorite example of this is a seat picker on a flight.
Right.
I guarantee you, you will never get an experience just with voice doing a good job at that.
No.
It'll be terrible. You need to look at where the seats are and is there someone in the middle? Like, so you can think of that as a form of visual content, like a widget
Mhm.
that the AI will be able to show to you that sort of starts to blend together the conversational experience of a chatbot and the traditional web experience too, so that the visual elements are integrated when they're appropriate. And then you'll click on the seat clicker to pick your seat, and then the AI will say, "Got it, Jonathan, you picked seat 5B." So I
Right.
think that's where it will go, and that will solve this problem you just raised, Adrian, which is that we can use the best modality for collecting and exchanging the piece of information that needs to be exchanged.
Mhm. Yeah, because it strikes me that the all of these systems are contingent on their success. It's contingent on the data that they get. And
Yeah,
so it's obviously if you get garbage in, you get garbage out in
exactly.
many. And so the more that you can control the front end and the quality of the data that's going in the front end, and the more you can do to enable people to give you accurate information. Like I sort of imagine a time when the system says, "Oh, we're seeing a lot of people reaching out to us today about X, Y, and Z," and that automatically populates into interfaces that are you calling about X, Y, and
Exactly.
Z? Can we
Yes.
fast track you into kind of like those sort of
Right.
solutions? Because it just makes, oh, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to explain myself. This is kind of
Right.
fine, and that translates into ease and convenience and so on and so
Yeah.
forth, kind of with
Absolutely.
the customer.
Absolutely. And that's sort of this personalization dimension where again, I think generative AI is so good at this, where you can just give it all this context about the user, about the company, what's going on right now. Just give it that context at the beginning of the call, and it can be have this incredible personalized response because it sort of remembers
Mhm.
all this information. And it's not that you couldn't do that before. Like we've been building agents, AI systems that have had that kind of experience for a long time. It just required an immense amount of like coding and configuration and having to predetermine all these conversation paths.
Mhm.
And that's now like fixed by generative AI. And so that's what I mean by this tipping point. It's going to enable, we'll see this massive personalization in our consumer experiences. Customers will demand it from their businesses, and we now have a tool to generate it. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, but then many of our listeners might be kind of like thinking, this is all great. It sounds really kind of like exciting and pretty easy to say, but probably quite a lot harder to do.
Yes, for sure.
And there's a whole bunch of research out there. I mean, crumbs. There's the stuff from MIT, and there's the stuff from which is on a small sample size, but a more robust sample size. I think there's research coming out of IBM and Accenture, which is saying many of these organizations are struggling to implement things at scale. They're struggling to generate an ROI from their investments,
Yeah.
and there's still caution about some of the risks. I mean,
Yes.
thinking about that, I mean, what are you seeing from the people that you're working with at Five9
Yeah.
from companies, and what are they doing well or right in order to harness
Yeah.
the potential of this new technology, and also what are they not doing, what are they avoiding?
Yeah. In some ways, this is the stuff that hasn't changed and shouldn't change. And I think this is forgotten in our enthusiasm and exuberance about AI, which is, listen, AI still makes mistakes.
Hmm.
It's inaccurate. It's got, in some sense, got a little worse with generative AI with its hallucinations. It can make stuff up, but we've always had accuracy problems. And the way you combat that is with sort of a rigorous process.
Right.
And so even we have a name for this at Five9, like the AI blueprint process that we take our customers through to help make sure they deliver success. And it's things that make sense. Identify the use cases you actually want to solve. Don't do all of them. Focus on the lowest complexity, highest return on investment cases. And
Yeah.
those don't have to be this science fictiony amazing stuff we just discussed. Adrian, the amount of people who are still doing password reset by like an old like by calling up and talking to a live human, like if you're still one of those people, that's a good start. And this, you don't even need generative AI to do that. You get a big, so take these cases and identify what they are, quantify how much success you'll get from them to determine your metric. Then the next thing you have to do is identify what data sources you need, what are the use cases and the types of conversations you have. You have to plug in those data sources. I'll tell you, this is another thing often overlooked
Yeah.
for success is a lot of the time we spend building AI for customers is like plugging the API into the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, oh, we don't have an API, or oh, the API doesn't work, or oh, to get a credential on the API system, it takes, you have to go through InfoSec approval, blah, blah, blah. Like all these are real problems. Like, and you can rework those. You have to focus on that, make sure you understand your data sources, make sure they're available. You can connect to them, define what success is, have a good test suite, a good rigorous process of acceptance test, incremental deployment, measure your results, see if they are there, adjust your performance of the system and tune the models and the AI to get better results, and then have this continuous loop of monitor, improve, deploy, monitor, improve, deploy, running,
Yeah.
and that's what you need. And everything I just said is as true 10 years ago when we started building AI systems as it is in the era of generative AI. In fact, it's more important in the era of generative AI.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's like I think it was a systems thinker gentleman called I think he's Robert Checkland or something, and he had a mantra was like check plan do, check plan do, check plan do, check plan do, and
Yeah.
that's the sort of thing because we have to think about these things systematically.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wanted to actually go back to the kind of the AI kind of blueprint sort of approach. I mean, you articulated the different approach, but I also wanted to sort of dig into the bit that I know that you do at the front end, which is sort of rather than actually going, here's a spanner, which is a particular kind of like type of tool for a particular use case, and go
Yeah.
and then try and plug it in. But as part of your blueprinting, you actually don't go tool first, as it were. You almost kind of look for patterns, kind of like first, and that tells you kind of how to do it. Because actually, this is the trick. I think is it leverages the power of generative AI and those things to actually find the patterns,
Yes.
and then you then know where to try thinking about deploying the tools, and that feels like a thing that many people don't get right. They almost like find a spanner and then go look for a nut to tighten, rather
Yeah.
than stepping back and going, okay, what's the landscape and what's the
Exactly.
patterns?
Exactly right. So we have a product even that we use as part of the blueprint process called AI Insights.
Okay.
It uses generative AI. It analyzes these calls and conversations and identifies what are the call drivers, clusters them together, correlates those with handle time and costs, and then allows you to deep dive in, also understand other metrics like customer satisfaction and issue resolution rates so that you can zero in on exactly what are the things that I should go and automate on this platform. So this data-driven approach
Mm-hmm.
that helps you quantify it is really, I think, the right formula for doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it, or almost like characterizing it with. Do you know remember the old fable about the tortoise and the hare?
Of
Uh,
course, yeah.
and I think it's beautifully illustrative of what's going on right now. You've got everybody that's trying to be a hare,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it's the tortoises that are winning because they're just being very deliberate, very
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
considerate
yeah.
about what they do, and ultimately they win the race.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great analogy, man. And let me harken it back to a tortoise cautionary tale, a hare cautionary tale, I should say. Which is we had this financial services company
Mm-hmm.
that I won't name them, but you probably know the story where they made some big bold statement that said, we're going to get rid of all of our agents.
Oh yes, and guess who it is?
Yeah. We're going to fire them all because AI is going to do everything. And they purportedly did. And then some months later they came back and said, "Oh, that
That thing
didn't
that
work
we
out.
that thing that we said.
Yeah, we brought the agents back because we think we're going to focus on delivering a great CX." So that's now I don't know whether that whole thing was just a PR stunt or what. If it did, it was brilliant. But it wouldn't surprise me if they did in fact try and fail on this. And I think that's sort of this cautionary tale of getting the exuberance ahead of yourself. And I think we are moving faster, and this technology is allowing us to move faster. But you still have to do all the stuff I just described,
Yeah.
and it's still even with this new generative AI, like people are taking, it still takes time,
Mm-hmm.
usually weeks, months, sometimes to get these implementations and going and go through these processes to make sure you're getting the results you need. And you can't forget about that.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it because I'll tell you what I'm seeing. Another thing I'm seeing, Adrian, is these punks in this case, not a good way. These punks that go and they find some little startup that's got a website with "We can get your customer support agents built today," and they type a few words into the instruction editor, and they call it up and it talks to them and it sounds great and it does something like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing!" And they go to their boss like, "Boss, we can fire all the agents. I found it. It's this thing over there." And we're seeing that. We're seeing like these sort of like and then kudos to them trying to use this new technology to disrupt, but they get it's so easy to get a good demo
Hmm.
out of this stuff. It takes like nothing to get a great demo.
Yeah.
And then but all the rest of it gets, you still have to go do that. And that's actually what matters.
And I think the other thing that I'm also kind of noticing is that what people seem to be underestimating is how the nature of this whole enterprise software business has changed. Whereas like they kind of say, "Oh, we do this thing," and you're like going, "It's not just plug and play and leave it. It's plug and play and then resource up and then manager and monitor and QA it and all these different sort of things." And so you might be able to fire all these you might be thinking about in your kind of like, I don't know, Darth Vader-ish sort of kind of way, kind of like, "I'll get rid of all these kind of people," but like, no. But then I've got this big gap that needs to kind of monitor these kind of like new systems.
Absolutely. And this gets back to my point, Adrian, in the beginning, too, where we think the best results are by combining
Yeah.
the human and AI together. And this is not just for serving the customer, but it's also for the set of human beings that have to oversee and continuously monitor, tune, and train, the AI.
Hmm.
So like one of the things that's really fascinating, for example, is we're finding this to be true that people love the idea of having an AI agent that can answer questions. Your
Hmm.
classic FAQ bot,
Yeah.
FAQ, right? One of the top cases we see for AI agents, and it works great if you have a great FAQ.
Right.
And where a lot of the questions and answers come from, they come from human agents that do the work of like figure out what the questions are and ruffling through all this inconsistent material and figure out the right answer. And so there's a human dimension of the workflow,
Yeah.
right? Which is how do you actually start to generate this knowledge from the humans that can be used to train the AI? And then you have to be able to detect the cases where the AI didn't know, make sure humans get that, have the humans curate the knowledge, better train the AI. So you get this collaborative loop.
Hmm.
And try this expression, this terminology on for a side. I've been using this idea of agentic collaboration where what we
Okay.
actually want is collaboration between the AI agents and the human agents in sort of a positive reinforcement loop in just the way I just described. And so you will only get successful outcomes with your AI
Hmm.
if you have agentic collaboration where your humans and AIs are working together in both directions.
I think that makes complete sense, and I think there's, if you think about many, particularly the customer service contact center environment where you've got many people that are working off diverse systems. Some people are working off anywhere from, I don't know, 6 to 15. Sometimes I've heard horror stories of north of 40 different applications they've got to
Yeah.
use to handle their normal kind of workload. Now,
Yeah.
the interesting thing is that oftentimes people have to figure out shortcuts and workarounds and all these different things to get their kind of work done. And then none of that stuff sits in an FAQ or a manual
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
process document. So
Right.
you got all this tacit knowledge that's in
That's right.
there. So you have to think about, well, how do I capture that and codify it
That's right.
to then to help the system kind of do all that? Because otherwise you end up with all these things that just kind of just don't knit together because they're operating on such simple assumptions and they don't
Yeah.
understand the complexity and variety that actually exists in the real system.
Yeah. Totally. So this is my prediction is in the next we'll see this initial, burst of excitement around AI agents. In the normal hype cycle, there'll be some pullback because of these problems. It doesn't have the right knowledge, doesn't have the right procedures. I'm having trouble with the accuracy, and we'll find that the next wave of investment, you know, um, is in this part of it, which is how do we use the humans to build a continuous feedback loop
Okay.
to extract and use humans to oversee the curation of the data that ultimately are used to provide to the AIs to do their job, both self-service and even supervised and human agents. That's the next wave of innovation I think we'll see over the coming years.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, that was interesting. I'll have to noodle on that one because I think that's really interesting. It very much aligns with me thinking about there's a particular random sort of like not random, but it's like a very real kind of case where, particularly in the field service engineer space, apparently there's a big problem because field service engineers they're generally aging and that we're not being able to replace them with enough kind of people that are coming in. But also the other kind of big thing is that apparently 30% of all of these problems that they face, the solutions to which are not contained in actual documentation. They're all in the kind of the experienced heads, and we haven't figured out, or we're only just trying to figure out a way to capture and codify that kind of knowledge so that
Yep,
it can be passed on and can leveraged. And so
exactly.
there's a massive kind of problems. I think they exist across the whole landscape and
Yeah.
stuff as well. And that how do you get the humans to work together with the technology to kind of like to one capture that and then improve it and modify it and then action it and so on and so forth. I think that's a really interesting kind of
Yeah,
like
and a continuous basis, right? And
oh
this is it doesn't stop. It's not a one and done, right? So you need
no.
that cycle you just described.
Well, and it's not as if people are not going to introduce new products or new services.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why you can't actually have a contact center with no humans, like ever, because then you can't adapt to the new,
Yeah, exactly.
you
It's like
know?
things are not going to get simpler; they're just going to get more complex by definition.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, can can we kind of like say maybe back up a little bit and
Yeah.
do you have an example of a brand that you're working with that you think actually the way that they're going about it is there's a lot to that can be learned, from this, in terms of like the challenges that they face and what they did and how they kind of overcome it and sort of some of the benefits and outcomes that they're driving.
Absolutely. So one of the ones as a brand that we think got it right is one of our customers called Sum Up, I think is their name.
Hmm.
And what they did is they were really struggling to scale multilingual support in like 30 plus different countries. They had
Hmm.
2,000 agents handling like 280,000 plus calls per month. And just
Wow.
your classic problem, like high volume, how do we deal with it to reduce costs, improve customer experience? And so what they did is they adopted our Five9 Intelligent Virtual Agent IVA and our workflow automation WFA to sort of streamline that support, and they got great results. So to share some of the data, we saw
Hmm.
50% call containment, right? Which is great. Fewer customers need a live agent, and at the end of the day, that produced a 23% cost savings compared to live agents. That's like jaw-dropping numbers. That's like you get promoted when you produce that kind of savings, right? um, and a 10% increase in self-service in just a few in the first year. And that did, what I've been talking about, which is it freed these agents up to focus on higher value conversations. And customers were able to get these resolutions from self-service in their native languages, right?
Right.
Another thing you get from AI as well. And so, but you still have the humans handling a lot of stuff. So the takeaway is this is a great example of this human plus AI collaboration. You get the scalable, efficient, personalized customer experience. So that was Sum Up as one of our customers that we have a case study for.
Awesome. That's brilliant. I mean, yeah, those are 23% to the cost reduction. That is definitely jaw dropping. I do fret for them kind of year two when you deliver kind of like year one cost reductions of
And then,
23%. And then they go like, so what
what are
happened
you
in year
doing for me
two?
next year? Exactly right.
You look at it, go, oh my God.
Yeah, that's a rough follow up,
Yeah, no, it is.
but the technology is always getting better, so it's
Well,
keep up with this innovation curve, I guess, is the lesson from that.
absolutely. So I know you kind of said you've been at the forefront of the communications technology for years now, and you mentioned that sort of you think the next wave is going to be that sort of human agentic collaboration sort of stuff, and I think that makes complete sense on the trajectory kind of like vector that we're on kind of right now. I mean, is there anything else that you see coming up on the horizon that you think actually this is something that we should be paying attention to, or putting on our radar that's going to have an impact on it, given that you're deep in the technology sort of like space?
Well, on a micro level, like every month there's something new, right? And so it's frankly been breathtaking to sort of try and keep up with the continuous waves of innovation in this space. um at the end of the day, many of those don't change a lot from like what the business results are and what you need to do, which is
Hmm.
deploy these agentic solutions into your environment to improve self-service, to help your live agents, to analyze, perform analytics, to assess what's going on in your enterprise. I think that's all true. So I think what we're going to see is just continued improvement in this technology with better accuracy, reduced time to implement, and then a lot of the innovations I talked about will be on sort of applying these technologies for this training
Right.
process, right? Which is sort of, now unsolved part of the problem, right?
Okay.
So I think it's still new in that space, but that's sort of what's a big part of what'll come next. So exciting times, and again, new dimensions of it. So one of the things that I think is exciting is, and I think this is maybe a little further on the horizon for the enterprise applications, is changing this idea of today you have this idea that you're talking to an agent and it works for you only while you're talking to it.
Right.
And once you hang up, it's done, right?
Right.
So if you think about it, wouldn't it be great if those agents could sort of continue to work on your behalf
Hmm.
even when you're not actively conversing with them? These are sometimes like background agents or
Right. Okay.
research agents. We're starting to see that, and what made and in fact, just this week was a big announcement from OpenAI with their first version of this kind of product. So I think these have great applications in the enterprise space, and in some ways they have the potential to transform customer experience from, like, if you think about, we went from reactive to proactive, and think of this almost like as the next wave of concierge,
Yeah.
right? And as to give an analogy, a lot of times technology, what it does is it takes something that was previously possible, but can only be affordable by the very wealthy,
Mm.
and make it available to all. And for the very wealthy, they have these personal assistants,
Yeah.
right? These people who follow them around, and you just, oh, go book me a flight and or a trip to Europe. Present 3 options for me, and come back tomorrow, and we'll review.
Yeah.
And they go off to do the work, and then come back to you, right? And only if you're like a super wealthy person do you have these, and I do not have one
Yeah.
of these personal assistants. I don't know about you. Uh, Imagine that's an AI agent, and it's able to do that for you. And imagine that's how you engage with a brand,
Mm.
right? It is working on your behalf all the time, following what you ask, being reactive to things for you. So
Yeah.
if you said, "Oh, if it knows that you're interested in a certain type of product, and that there's a new update to the product, it could go and reach out to you and say, "Hey, there's a new version of this thing. Do you want to upgrade? Let me describe it to you." And that there's a proactive case, and you say, "I don't know. What would be the impact for me? My cost?" It goes and analyzes it for you, and lets you know tomorrow. Like, imagine that kind of experience. Adrian, this would be breathtaking. So as that kind of stuff begins to mature, I can see that also impacting CX in a few years. So lots of exciting stuff ahead.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I've already seen some people trying to develop that type of sort of functionality that's on that concierge type of line. And
Yeah.
yes, it's, I mean, like super interesting. But Jonathan, I mean, that's in terms of the main body of my questions. That's me at the end. I mean, just wanted to ask you before I ask you some quick fire questions. Anything else that you want to add or highlight that we might have missed out before I ask you some quick fire questions?
I think we covered a lot of the great stuff.
Cool.
Yep.
Right. So let's do quick fire, shall we?
All right.
So 3 questions. First one is I always ask people to boil things down. I ask them for their best advice.
All right.
And the way I've been doing that recently is to ask them to complete this sentence. And
Okay.
the sentence is, if you want to improve your customer experience, Jonathan says, do this. Dot dot dot.
Okay.
Complete that sentence.
Okay. All right. So, sort of distilling some of what we said, I would say automate the routine and humanize the complex, right? Um,
Drop the
and
mic. Just
yeah,
walk off stage.
that's great. So, and again, gets back to this idea of don't get rid of the people. You still need them. You need them for empathy, but take this routine stuff like the password reset and automate it, but don't forget the human equation.
Hmm.
Um, and then, the next thing I would say is, make your data work harder,
Right.
right? And you sort of hinted at this too, and all these different data sources and stuff like that. You got to collect the data from all these backend systems so the customer sees one brand, unify them across these things, get personal responses out of them, and then also extract data from your contact center, right? Help you understand where you should be investing in those things. So those are two. I'll leave you with those two.
No, absolutely. I mean, I would say that particularly that first one, 100%. The second one, people need to do more of it because I keep saying it again and again and again. Is that the contact center is the biggest and fastest growing real time data set in any company.
Yeah.
And if you're not accessing it, if you're not analyzing it, you're not
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
mining it for insights and then acting on these insights across your business, you're
Yeah.
missing out a huge opportunity.
Absolutely. And before it used to be really hard. Like
Mhm.
it was the dark data of the enterprise because it's unstructured. It was all these recordings, and even getting something like a word tree out of it was like
Mhm.
a, which is not that useful if we're being totally honest with ourselves,
Mhm.
was like a huge amount of work, right? Now with generative AI and its ability to understand and parse huge volumes of this unstructured conversations and convert it into structured data, I think we're just dipping our toes in the water, and we're going to see just tons of innovation in this space over the coming years, of which I've given some examples, like extracting
Yeah.
these frequently asked questions and knowledge out of these conversations and curating that. I mean, wow,
Yeah.
that's an example of this dark data that we can now start to shine a flashlight on. So get
Excellent.
started, Adrian, right? Get started on doing that.
So the second question, Jonathan, I have is, and it has to be a punk related one because obviously this is the Punk CX podcast, and I like to ask people, who do you think is taking a more punk approach to CX and why? Which sort of brand?
Great question. So I'll give you one example
Mhm.
that's not in the contact center, but I think is a good example of the application of these things, which is Puma, right?
Okay.
Which, the shoes, right? And one of the things they did, and there's a story you can read about this, that they they realized that their imagery, and imagery is so central to selling these type of products on the web, was fairly static and the same sort of boring, picture of a person wearing a shoe or a
Mhm.
shoe on a white background kind of thing. And that, so they actually applied generative AI to sort of create contextualized, personalized, vibrant scenes with their content in it. And that helps drive this personalized experience on the web, on
Right.
an e-commerce situation that makes it feel personal, and it increases your engagement, and it speeds out marketing too because they can speed past traditional like photo shoots and editing. And so I think that's kind of punk. It's a little daring. Is
Right.
it? And I think there's still some fear and trepidation on image, for this kind of application, image generation, right? We see a lot of it in sort of social media marketing where
Mhm.
it's the risk is low, but on your e-commerce site, that's pretty punk, Adrian. That's pretty punk. So kudos to Puma for breaking fresh ground on that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And then my final question, and it's about trying to end on a good news story or a positive note. Because if you look at the news, it all feels like there's a lot of doom scrolling going on, or there's almost like the world that feels in a slightly odd kind of place. And
Yeah.
so I always ask kind of people, let's finish on a positive note and ask them to say, can you tell me a good news story or something that you've seen in the last week that's really interesting, positive, or there's something that made you smile, Jonathan?
Ooh, something that made me smile.
And it can be a random thing.
That could be a random one. I hadn't thought about a random thing that made me smile. It's pretty hard to say that one. I think you're totally right because so much of the news is like negative stuff these days. Well, I'll maybe while I ponder that in the background, and maybe we'll get to that. I'll at least give you an example of a maybe not made me smile, but sort of said, "Dang, that's cool. We're moving
Okay,
fast,"
there
kind of
you
thing.
go.
And I hinted at that, which is that this week, OpenAI, who I think continues to sort of do a lot of pioneering work in this space, not without some foibles, of course, but
Mhm.
they're paving the way, and so they introduced this ChatGPT Pulse feature just a few days ago that says we're gonna pioneer the next iteration of this thing and allow these things to sort of work asynchronously in the background for you. And I thought that was so exciting because it was this precursor to this vision we had for brands that we already talked about in the CX space. And I think that's now showing us where the next few years will lead. So did it put a smile on my face? Was it a feel good story? No, but it was a pretty exciting piece of tech news that I thought was pretty cool on the continuous AI news.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, that's sometimes it's funny. Is sometimes that question stumps kind of
Yeah.
people, just because
Yeah.
it's one of those things you have to step back and then kind of like spot something, and it's great because actually you never know kind of like what people are going to come up with. So that's always it's always a fun one.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. That's all I have today, Jonathan. I just want to say thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your expertise with me today. That has been awesome.
And it's been awesome to chat with you, Adrian, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and expertise as well.
Thank you.
All right, man. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.